season. We now know, due to the CBA, we think, and also maybe they could say Corona, but it seems like mostly this whole CBA agreement is pushing the season back. It has been pushed back. I think they said April 3rd. So now we have a couple more months. It's about 1.5, 2 months later than the season normally starts. Normally supposed to start at the end of February. We now see it starting April 3rd, and this is just another one of those moments where we're just sitting here frustrated as MLS fans that they can't come to an agreement, that we don't have soccer for another month and a half, and it's just, I'm not too happy with this one.
Look, I'll say it every time that we have to talk about the new CBA, when the league office is going to argue with the Players Association. They're going to decide the new rules outset for the upcoming season. And I say it every time. I say the MLS historically has had a somewhat smooth relationship outside of the 2015 negotiations throughout their history of getting the season started on time, making sure the players are paid a good amount. But there's been other major sports, American leagues, that have had strikes, several strikes throughout their history. Major League Baseball is the prime example of this. But unfortunately, the MLS is playing with a smaller deck of cards when it comes to dealing with issues like COVID compared to the rest of these leagues, because MLS just doesn't have the same profit percentages that these other leagues make. All of these other leagues are billion dollar companies and billion dollar franchises all across the league. The MLS margins just aren't that wide, especially when you're not filling the stadiums with fans. You have COVID, you have a limited season, you're playing 11 less regular season matches per team. Those are all 11 opportunities for each team to make money from their fan bases, tuning into the games for TV rights, and in a non-COVID year, going to the games, filling out stadiums, selling merchandise, selling concessions. It's just a big lose-lose for everybody. When you have COVID, you're not bringing in as much money. There's not as much money to go around for the front office, who are obviously there to make money. Look, MLS is for profit. It's for money. All the players, everybody's trying to make money, right? And the players as well.
And it makes sense why this is the case. I mean, like you said, the MLS isn't as big of an entity as the NFL, who can take a hit for a year or so, but it doesn't seem like that's really been too much of a hit to a league like the NFL, because they did have a nice lucky break where their season was ended right after or right before COVID started, and then they kind of broke free with that, whereas the MLS wasn't so lucky. They got a big hit to their MLS season, had to come back with the MLS is Back tournament, and then it's just been kind of a mix-up ever since then. And now we're seeing this all come to fruition again, where they have to come up with an agreement. The players know they're going to have to take a pay cut, and I don't think that's the issue right now. The players aren't trying to say they don't deserve a pay cut. The players know what happened. The players know that they have to take some sort of pay cut. All the staff knows that that's the case, but it's always the numbers, the percentages, and all that kind of stuff that we get into. And right now, it's just frustrating to see that they can't come to an agreement after it took so long the last time this CBA came around to come to an agreement. The numbers just never match up.
Yep, and we talked about all of that. We broke it down, all of the numbers, what had happened in this past offseason a couple episodes ago in the Supporters Pod. So this is kind of the next episode. This is the next event that's happened in the CBA negotiations. Go back and watch that episode if you haven't already. It breaks down all of the numbers and what we're looking at going forward. Now, we said we'd update you when we got an update on the negotiations, on what was happening with the CBA. And the reason we bring it up today, the reason we preface the episode with that is, according to Jeff Carlisle of ESPN, the league has imposed a deadline of January 29th at midnight, which means Friday night at midnight of the day that this episode goes up, to negotiate with the MLS Players Association. And there's less than a day for the MLS and the Players Association to actually come to an agreement. And let's be honest, if the MLS is coming out and the front office is imposing this deadline, you're going to most likely see a lockout. It seems like a miracle at this point, with how much limited time there is left, that they'll actually get it together.
It seems right now like deja vu to the last time this happened, when they had the pay cut, and then the MLS came out and said, we have to have everything, we have to have all the numbers settled by this date. They threatened to cut the numbers a lot. The players got frustrated about that, and the Players Association said, no, we're not going to listen. We're not going to just be your little pawns and listen to everything you say. We need to come to a solid agreement, and they're going to end up claiming it's going to be on this date and being the big scary guy in the situation, but it's going to come down to it, and they're going to have a lockout, or it's going to be something where the date just keeps getting pushed back, and it takes time to come to an agreement. I mean, this is exactly what we saw last time around when the CBA, when they had to come to an agreement about a pay cut. I mean, it just seems like it's deja vu, and I don't like seeing this, because for the fans, it just means more drama, more stuff that gets pushed back, and no fan wants to see this kind of stuff happen. Every fan just wants to see the players out on the pitch playing the game they love to watch.
you knew that the MLS was going to have the power in these negotiations because they're the ones that ultimately, while the players are the ones actually going on the pitch, the MLS is the one that's actually receiving the profit and figuring out how it's going to be distributed. And the MLS is also the one that gets to decide when the season starts. They're the one that actually puts this thing on. And we'll talk about it later in this episode, but they've released the dates for the upcoming regular season, when it's going to start, when rivalry week will be, and all the other important dates throughout the regular season. And we also got the date for MLS Cup. They shoved the beginning of the regular season back to April. They probably had some sway and some talks in the CONCACAF Champions League, which is also starting in April. So we thought the MLS clubs would get more of a boost. They really don't. We can also talk about that. But what they're doing by pushing this regular season date back to April 4th, it's very clear what they're doing. And the strategy is push it back so the MLS has more time to grind the players down to getting the deal that the front office and the MLS wants ultimately. And in the short term, that might get them the deal they want. In the long term, that's going to make a really rocky relationship even worse.
Yeah, you talk about it being a rocky relationship. Do you think, because we talked about it in the past when this first CBA came up, that the MLS, we feel like, has a pretty good relationship with the Players Association compared to some other leagues we've seen in baseball. Obviously, they tend to have quite a bit of tension. Do you think these CBA agreements have started to make that relationship a little more strained? And I mean, because personally, from what I'm seeing, the MLS and the MLSPA has started to grow more distant in the last, 18 months probably. And I don't think they have quite the same relationship that we used to think they had.
Absolutely. And one of these two sides is going to come out of this, most likely the players. When it comes spring, you're most likely going to start on that April date. You might see a little bit more of a delay if the players really want to lock out. But what you're most likely going to see out of this is the players taking a percentage of a pay cut, the MLS taking a very tiny pay cut that's really kind of irrelevant to them. And what you're going to see long term, the biggest consequence is a strained relationship. Like you mentioned, what are we seeing now on social media more, on Instagram and on Twitter? We're seeing the MLS players create accounts and create coalitions, essentially, like the Black Players for Change, the Players Association as a whole. You're seeing these players talk more and more about, we are the MLSPA, we are the Players Association, we have a voice. What they're doing is they're actually going away from the league and talking on their own. And that's not what the league wants them to do. What the league wants them to do is quietly go to the negotiating table, not upset the apple cart with any of their supporters, because the players are the ones that have the supporters. There's no avid Don Garber supporters out there, right? The Soccer Don, as much of an electrifying personality as he is, he's not the one that's bringing the money to the MLS. It's the players and the big support that they have. So many more people are going to back Carlos Vela than are going to back the Soccer Don when it comes to the negotiating table. And so if Carlos Vela goes out and turns his back a little bit and goes to social media as an outlet to express his support for his side of the deal, most people are going to side with him. And that's when you really start to see a disconnect between negotiations and conversations between the MLS front office and the players. It's almost like politics nowadays. Most people are talking to their own sides, talking to their own base, and refusing to talk to the other side and refusing to actually come up with a compromise. And you're going to see it get more and more distant, more and more extreme between the players and the front office the longer it goes on.
Yeah, and I think the MLS knows that that's the case, and they know that they have to keep a good relationship with these players, but they're also on the side of the money and the revenue, and they want to be pushing that as far as they can. They basically are trying to find the balance point of how far can we push this so that the players will take as much of a pay cut as possible, but also so that they're not going to be going out on their own and making these coalitions, I guess you could say, and making all the fans hate the league. It's a hard balance for them to find, and I think everyone wants them to be able to take more of a pay cut, but for the MLS to grow the way it's been growing, it's hard for them to take a pay cut. So it's such a hard situation we're in. The players know it, the MLS knows it, and we're just trying to find a way that these two can come to an agreement with a little bit of a pay cut. But I don't know. It just seems like right now it's going to just be continued. It's going to be prolonged until probably pretty close to the season, and hopefully it doesn't affect the regular season start or the new regular season start. I'm assuming it won't because they have pushed that back so far. But I just don't like the direction it's moving in, because the players need to have a good relationship with the MLS for the MLS to continue to grow at the level it's been growing at.
Now, here are the numbers, and they can be a little bit misleading because we don't actually know the percentages of what the league's making per year or what the players combined are making per year. Here are the numbers, though, with coronavirus and with the pandemic. The league claims that they have lost over $1 billion in revenue this past regular season, and we don't know, I want to reiterate exactly what percentage that is, but that's absolutely a significant amount and changes the way that MLS is going to come to the negotiating table. What's also going to change the way the players come to the negotiating table on the other side is last June when we talked about the CBA on this podcast, and we said these two sides need to come to a long-term agreement or to a short-term agreement that they can agree to come back to in good faith almost. And the MLS kind of blew that up with invoking the force majeure clause and forcing the sides back to the negotiating table right now. The players gave up $150 million in concessions last June. Those are both big numbers, and those are both big concessions for sides that make both sides a little bit more irritated with the other, wanting to get more out of this next deal, and it's just going to make it harder.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a sticky situation we're in, and ultimately the MLS knows that this is that kind of situation. I mean, obviously the players are being put in a situation where they don't want to be losing any more money. Like you said, we've already seen them taking a massive pay cut. That's what they're going to be using as their I guess ammo, you could say. They're going to be saying, we look at how much we've taken as a pay cut, look at how much money you've basically made off of our pay cut. And this starts to bring up the point of like we said, a long-term deal. Do you think the MLS will move into a long-term deal where they try and say, okay, for the next 5 years, you're going to take maybe a smaller percentage pay cut than you would if you took a bigger percentage pay cut for one season, but let's say they take a smaller percentage pay cut for the next 3-4 years, as opposed to, like I said, a shorter term, bigger percentage pay cut. Do you think that the players would want something like that, or do you think the league would want something like that? I don't know. What do you see happening?
I see the longer that players take a pay cut into the future, if they take small pay cuts into 2022, 23, 24, at the negotiating table, that's going to look really bad. And most players are going to reject that idea straight away, because as soon as this is over and we have a vaccine, we sort of see a light at the end of the tunnel, although there's some good news, some bad news coming out as we venture through sort of this section of COVID-19. But the players don't want to keep taking pay cuts after this whole thing is over, because they know the league is going to get back to somewhat full stadiums and back to the normal amount of money profit intake that they're getting per year. If they can sign on to a deal that does that creates a small reduction in pay distant into the future, into 2023, 2024, what that means is that the deal runs through those years and the players don't have to come back to the negotiating table very soon. They don't have to come back next year. They don't have to come back in 2 years. They would have to come back in 5 or 6 years, and that would be a great thing for the relationship. It would be bad for the players immediately because they would be taking this long-term pay cut, even if it isn't a huge percent. But if the sides don't have to go to the negotiating table for 5 or 6 years, that's going to be great, because that's going to allow them to cloud their history and all of the rockiness that's happened in these past 2 years. By the time that they come back to the negotiating table in 2025, 26, all of that will be completely forgotten on all of the new players that have come into the league.
And that's where I think that the MLS probably need to try and find something that maybe it's not 3, 4, 5 years, maybe it's just 2 years, so that they can make an agreement so that the players don't have to come back to the table next year. I think that this is going to be an ongoing situation for as long as COVID is around, and for as long as this lack of income, lack of revenue is around. We're going to see an MLS that has to come to the players and propose these pay cuts, because for them to be making the amount of revenue that they want to be making right now, they're not making that money. They need to find it somewhere else, and the players is the perfect place for them to find that money. It's just such a tough spot, but I don't think the players are going to agree with that. I don't think the players are going to the players are okay with this continuous struggle, because they know that that's going to be best for them. I think they're worried if the MLS tries to make a 2-year deal, a 3-year deal, 4-year deal, they're going to be getting hurt in the long run, and they're going to be thinking, well, a year from now, COVID might be gone. We don't deserve to take a pay cut if COVID is no longer in existence. Well, maybe, I mean, sure, I'm sure it will never not be in existence, but for as long as COVID is affecting us, they don't want to be taking a pay cut, or they don't want to be taking a pay cut when it's gone. So I don't think that they're going to want to make it a more than 1-year deal. And it's going to be that battle back and forth that I'm sure that's going on right now that we just don't know about.
That's the biggest incentive for the players to take a very short-term deal here, is to reevaluate and basically accuse the league once COVID's over, maybe at the end of the 2021 season, and say, hey, you're back up to full profits. You're back up to 100% capacity stadiums, making as much money as you would in a normal year. Now you get to pay us 100% fully. That's the biggest incentive. But like I said before, both sides don't want to do this every year. Nobody likes this. Not analysts like us, not fans and supporters of the league, and certainly not the Players Association and the front office.